Most people think they just need to eat less and move more to lose weight. But your fat cells are actually releasing a hidden hormone that actively fights your diet. Body fat has a lot of nicknames, most of them not very flattering. Scientifically, it's called adipose tissue, and it's not just sitting under your skin doing nothing. It's wrapped around your organs, tucked between your muscles, and it's constantly sending and receiving chemical messages to and from your brain. To understand how it actually works, how food becomes fat, and how fat gets used again, we're going to trace one meal from the moment it's swallowed all the way to the moment its energy gets burned. Quick note before we start. This video is for general education. It's not medical advice, and if you're making decisions about your own diet or weight, it's worth checking in with a doctor or registered dietitian who knows your specific situation. Let's start with what's actually in your food. Nutritionally, everything you eat breaks down into two categories: micronutrients and macronutrients. Micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, don't carry any usable energy. Macronutrients are the ones that do, and there are really only three that matter for energy: protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Alcohol technically counts too, but we'll leave that one aside today. The moment food enters your mouth, chewing breaks it into smaller pieces, saliva starts moistening it, and enzymes, specialized proteins whose whole job is to break other molecules apart, start working on the carbohydrates specifically. From there, everything slides down the esophagus into the stomach, where stomach acid and more enzymes spend a couple of hours churning it into a soupy mixture. That mixture then moves into the small intestine, where it meets enzymes from the pancreas that finish the breakdown job. By this point, proteins have been broken into amino acids, carbohydrates into simple sugars, and fats into smaller fat molecules. All three are now small enough to pass through the wall of the intestine and into your body properly. Here's where it gets interesting. Sugars and amino acids take one route, and fats take a completely different one. The sugars and amino acids slip directly into small blood vessels and travel straight to the liver for processing. Fats can't do that. They're bundled by intestinal cells into larger packages called chylomicrons, which are too bulky to fit into those small blood vessels. Instead, they enter your lymphatic system, a separate network of vessels that eventually drains into a large vein near your collarbone. Only then do those fat packages finally join your bloodstream. It's a strange bit of plumbing when you think about it. Your body essentially routes fat on a detour through an entirely separate transport system before it's even allowed to mix with the rest of your blood. Sugars and protein get the express lane straight to the liver, where they're processed almost immediately. Fat takes the scenic route, and by the time it reaches your bloodstream, your body has already had time to prepare for its arrival. So now you've got a batch of fat circulating through your blood. Left completely alone, that would actually be a problem. Fat can't just float around loose in your bloodstream indefinitely.
Your body needs somewhere to put it, and that's where two specific tissues come in: your muscles and your fat cells.
Enzymes break the fat bundles into smaller, usable pieces, and depending on the signals your body is sending at that moment, those pieces either get burned by muscle for immediate energy or absorbed and stored by fat cells for later. The hormone directing that decision is insulin. After you eat, your pancreas releases insulin into your bloodstream, and one of its main jobs is to tell your fat tissue, start storing, while telling your muscle tissue to relax and not compete for that incoming fuel. The result, especially after a large meal, is that a good portion of the fat you just ate ends up getting repackaged and tucked away inside your fat cells for later use. This isn't a flaw in your system. It's actually a pretty efficient design. Your body is essentially triaging incoming fuel. Send what's needed right now to the tissues doing active work, and bank the surplus somewhere safe for a time when food might not be so easy to come by. The problem, for a lot of people today, isn't that this system exists. It's that later rarely arrives, because the next meal is never more than a few hours away. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Whether someone is at a healthy weight or significantly overweight, they usually have roughly the same number of fat cells. What differs is how full each one is. Your body strongly prefers to keep stuffing the fat cells you already have rather than manufacturing brand new ones. New fat cells are actually fairly rare to form in adulthood. So if fat cells are basically savings accounts, how does your body ever make a withdrawal? It starts, again, with hormones. When you're hungry, your pancreas releases signals. When you exercise, your adrenal glands get involved. Even while you sleep, your brain is releasing hormones that interact with your fat tissue. These hormones travel through your blood and eventually bump into receptors sitting on the surface of your fat cells. Think of the receptors as tiny mailboxes waiting for a specific delivery. When the right hormone lands on that receptor, it triggers a chain reaction inside the cell. Specialized enzymes activate and start breaking the stored fat down into smaller and smaller pieces until they're finally small enough to slip out of the fat cell entirely and into the surrounding fluid. There's one catch. Fat doesn't mix with water, and your bloodstream is mostly water. So these freed up fat molecules hitch a ride on a carrier protein that ferries them safely through your blood until they pass by a tissue that's actively burning fuel. Maybe your heart, muscles doing work, or your liver. That tissue pulls the fat out of the bloodstream, hands it off to the cell's mitochondria, the part of the cell responsible for converting fuel into usable energy, and there, the fat is broken down further and converted into a molecule called ATP, which is essentially the energy currency your cells run on. Here's the part that trips people up. Your body actually relies more heavily on fat for fuel while you're resting than while you're doing intense exercise. The harder and more explosively your muscles are working, the more they lean on quick-burning carbohydrates instead. You still burn more total fat during a hard workout simply because you're burning more of everything. But pound for pound, low-intensity activity and even rest draw a higher percentage of their energy from fat. That's counterintuitive for a lot of people, because we tend to associate a hard, sweaty workout with burning fat specifically. In reality, a brisk walk, a slow bike ride, or even sitting still and reading a book are all drawing a bigger share of their energy from fat than an all-out sprint would. Intensity and total calories burned still matter for overall fitness and health. This isn't an argument to skip exercise, but it's a useful reminder that fat burning isn't something that only happens when you're gasping for breath. There's a piece of this story that researchers didn't fully understand until the 1990s. Your fat tissue is in constant communication with your brain. Every fat cell releases a hormone called leptin, and roughly speaking, the fuller the cell, the more leptin it releases. That leptin travels through your bloodstream up to a region of your brain called the hypothalamus, which acts like a control center for hunger. When leptin levels are high, your hypothalamus interprets that as energy reserves are full and dials hunger down. When leptin is low, it interprets that as reserves are getting low and turns hunger up. In theory, this should keep your weight fairly stable over time. So here's a fair question. If someone is carrying a lot of excess fat, their fat cells should be pumping out huge amounts of leptin, which should make them feel almost no hunger at all. So why doesn't that happen?
The honest answer, based on current research, is that the hypothalamus doesn't actually know what a healthy leptin level looks like. It only tracks what's normal for that individual, based on recent experience. If someone's leptin levels have been elevated for a long time, the brain gradually treats that elevated level as the new normal, and hunger signals adjust accordingly, staying active even though, on paper, there's plenty of stored energy available. Researchers refer to this general pattern as leptin resistance, and it's one of several reasons that losing weight and then keeping it off tends to be much harder than it sounds. Picture trying to lose weight this way. Your fat cells start shrinking, leptin drops, and your hypothalamus notices the change and turns hunger up in response. Keep losing weight steadily, and at a certain point, your brain can start treating the situation like an emergency. Not because anything is actually wrong, but because a fast drop in stored energy has historically meant real danger throughout most of human history. In response, your body can quietly slow down aspects of your metabolism to conserve energy, which is part of why rapid weight loss so often stalls out. It's worth saying clearly, this doesn't mean your metabolism is broken, and it doesn't mean weight loss is hopeless. It means your body is doing exactly what it was built to do: defend against what it perceives as a threat to your energy reserve. Understanding that mechanism is genuinely useful because it explains why so many people can stick to a diet perfectly for a few weeks, hit a plateau, and assume they're doing something wrong, when really their biology is just pushing back the way it's designed to. For most of human history, food was unreliable, and losing weight almost always meant something was wrong. Not enough to eat, illness, or worse. Our biology evolved around scarcity, not around a world with fast food on every corner. That mismatch is a big part of why weight loss can feel like your own body is working against you. A quick disclaimer here too. The numbers below are general population guidelines, not a personal prescription. Everyone's situation is different, and this isn't a substitute for advice from a healthcare provider who knows your health history. The good news is that your hypothalamus's sense of normal isn't permanently fixed. It can shift over time. That's a big part of why slower, steadier weight loss tends to work better than crash approaches. Many health organizations point to somewhere around 1 to 2 pounds per week as a reasonable, sustainable pace for most adults. Losing weight faster than that isn't necessarily dangerous for everyone, but it does tend to trigger a stronger hunger and metabolic pushback, making it harder to stick with over time. At that slower pace, your hypothalamus still nudges your hunger up somewhat, but it's a manageable nudge rather than an alarm bell. You're giving your brain time to gradually adjust its baseline instead of shocking it. So what actually needs to happen for fat to shrink in the first place? It comes down to the same hormonal signal we talked about earlier. Fat only gets released from storage when your body is running short on incoming energy. In practical terms, that means being in a calorie deficit, using a bit more energy than you're taking in. It's worth pausing on what a calorie actually is, because the word gets thrown around loosely. A calorie is simply a unit of energy. It's not a measure of how healthy a food is. When we talk about calories in food, we're talking about how much energy your body can extract from the protein, carbs, and fat inside it. That means it's entirely possible to eat less energy while actually eating a larger volume of food, just by choosing foods that are less energy-dense. Think about the difference between a small handful of nuts and a large bowl of vegetables. The nuts might contain more total energy than the entire bowl, even though the bowl is far larger and probably more filling. Neither one is bad, but it's a useful example of why the phrase "eat less" is a bit misleading. The more accurate version is "eat less energy," which can look very different depending on what you actually choose to eat. But here's an important distinction. Being in a calorie deficit will produce weight loss almost no matter how you get there, but that doesn't automatically mean it's a healthy approach. Severely restricting food while barely moving can create a deficit and still leave you undernourished. On the flip side, eating however you want while exercising enough to outrun it can also create a deficit while doing very little for your long-term health. Weight loss and overall health aren't automatically the same thing, and it's worth keeping both in mind rather than chasing the number on the scale alone. There's also a middle ground worth mentioning. How a deficit is created affects how sustainable it is. A moderate reduction in food, combined with a reasonable amount of movement, tends to be easier to maintain for months or years than an extreme version of either approach. Since weight regain after a diet is common, the research increasingly points towards sustainability, something a person can actually keep doing, as being just as important as the size of the deficit itself. So here's the bigger picture. Every bite of food you eat goes on a genuinely complex journey, broken down, sorted, shuttled through different systems, and either burned immediately or tucked away for later, all directed by a small handful of hormones working in the background without you ever noticing. Fat isn't just passive storage, it's an active tissue that's constantly talking to your brain, and your brain is constantly adjusting your hunger based on what it's heard recently. That's a big part of why weight loss so often feels like fighting your own body, because in a very real biological sense, you sometimes are. None of this makes weight loss impossible. It just explains why slow, steady, sustainable changes tend to beat drastic ones, and why two people eating the exact same diet can have very different experiences trying to lose weight. Your biology isn't broken if this has been hard for you. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do in a food environment it was never designed for. If this made your food journey make a little more sense, the next video in this series breaks down why some people seem to gain weight more easily than others, genetics, gut bacteria, and a few other pieces of the puzzle. I'll link it below. Let me know in the comments what part of this surprised you most. A lot of people don't expect the leptin part. And if you want more videos that explain the actual science behind everyday health questions, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.